country take our hand.
Let me begin by saying that you can also contribute to this program this morning, and you know how the information is going to get on your screen shortly, and that is talking about our X platform, Sunrise CTV. That's where you find us on X, formerly Twitter. Your questions, your contributions to the state of the nation conversation we're about to have for about 30 minutes or so, you'll be able to join in on the conversation. But let's begin by saying that over the years, a number of people, experts in various parts of the nation, have expressed themselves and given reasons for the country's stunted socio-economic and political growth. Many believe that the problems lie with our leaders, past and present. And don't forget that recently, Atelo Peterside, of course, you know him as the founder of ANA Foundation, said members of the Nigerian political and business elite were competing in a game called state capture. Now, he defined state capture as a situation where a country that is supposed to work for 200 million people works for a handful of people, and some others have also conversed the citizens need to have attitudinal change. An argument that will also come up from that would be, which citizens? The ones who have captured the state, or the ones who are looking at the ones who have captured the state? What needs to change? These are some of the conversations we'll be having this morning with three gentlemen. But let's begin with the one we have in the studio here now. Biodun Showumi is here with us in the studio. He is a social commentator. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Well, a number of things have played out in the course of the week, even in the course of the past 2 weeks. The minimum wage issue, local government autonomy, a number of people have raised issues around growing insecurity. We've had quite a number of unfortunate building collapses that have claimed people's lives, complaints about the devaluation of the naira, and several other issues like that, which you may also want to venture into. And there are those who would also reference the fact that certain people who make certain comments they are labeled sort of as enemies of the state, such as the case of Senator Ndume. In all of these, which of these issues do you think should get more prominence among the people?
Well, I think the insecurity issue is critical to food production. And without getting the food production, ramping up food production, you cannot ideally, bring down the prices of goods and services within the country. And basically, that means we'll continue to have inflation on the upright. The second issue also is the issue of the naira currency, the value of the naira, which again is a major issue. What do we need to do in order to boost our reserves and stabilize the value of naira, actually bring it down? So there are a lot of issues. The issue of Dangote is there, so many other issues, but I'm comfortable with any of them.
No. You don't have a choice. You have to be comfortable with any of them because, you've dealt with these issues over the years,
yes.
Which is the real issue here, that some of these issues are not coming at us strangely. There are issues that have been with us for so long.
Yeah, like local government issue.
Yeah.
It's always been there.
And I always contend on that, Mr. Showumi, that it's a no-brainer. We have had local governments function in the past efficiently and effectively, and we know that they are the first line of defense against insecurity. When well-kitted, they know what to do. When not well-kitted, we know the consequences. So why is it taking us so long?
Yeah, but when you actually look at local government in the past, we've had very successful local government operations in the past. At the same time, you've also had a period when local government could not even pay salaries of teachers or sanitation workers and all that. And huge corruption were reported at in different local government areas in the country. That was precisely what led. Those were the issues that led to the state government actually taking over those functions and allocating salaries to local government officials to pay. And since then, we've had teachers being paid and all.
Apologies. Isn't that a violation of the Constitution?
Yeah, we need to look at the anomalies in the Constitution. In a true federalism, you cannot have 3 tiers, whether the principles of federalism or if you actually go into theory or practice, even in major, federalist countries like Brazil, like India, like US, you do not have, you only have the federating states, the constituent parts are the federating states and the center. The center is the coordinator. So where do we get the third tier from in the first instance? To the extent that we are even, derogating away from fiscal federalism, into making the local government a third tier. Is local government a constituent part of the federation? Is it part of the federating entities in Nigeria?
Is it not?
It's not. It is not. If you go to...
According to the Constitution?
Well, it's only on the monetary aspect. Nigeria is a federal republic. Nigeria is supposed to practice federalism. Is not a federating unit in this country. So what we've seen is the decision of the Supreme Court actually, is more or less making the local government, part of the third tier, in the whole system. That should not be the case.
But is it something that you think worked for us before, or it's always been an anomaly?
Look, since we've been experimenting with this current constitution drafted by the military, it is an anomaly. Look, you cannot continue because you need to look at what happened to local governments over the years. They were not even proportionally distributed. It's another avenue to accumulate more resources, to one state or the other in the country. That should not even be the case. It should strictly be the problem of the state governments on how many local governments they want, how to administer their states. I don't think is the responsibility of the Constitution to ascribe, those roles, to local government. If you go to United States of America, there are conditions if you want to have a local government. There are issues around how do you intend to manage them? How do you intend to fund them? The people in that area may have agreed that, look, increase our land use charge by a certain percentage in order to fund it. And in exchange, after satisfying those criteria, in exchange, the states will hand over your health care system to you, hand over your local education, authority and all that, to that local government. That's how local governments are created. So they are never federating units.
Okay. So the challenge then would be, excuse me, because what the Constitution says, money should come from the federal government into a purse. The state government should contribute into that same purse or onward distribution to the local governments. That hasn't happened in a while. At least that's what the Constitution says. So maybe the lawmakers would look at the wisdom of what you're saying now and say, okay, well, maybe we should actually retinker with this. But then look at the political class and look at the way the local government administrations, look at the way the local governments have been administered over the years, especially in this republic. You would recall that in the third republic, even in the third republic, it was very efficient. Although we had a military president or head of state at the time, we had a very, very efficient and active local government system. In the Second Republic, they were active. In the First Republic, they were active. You remember that they had they were very efficient in those days. So what happened to us in this republic?
Well, the years of military rule, also
but they worked well under the military.
They did. I must admit that they did. But when we ushered in democracy in 1999, what we saw between 1999 and 2003, 2004, turned out to be a detraction, from what used to happen. We witnessed an era where local government stopped, performing their basic functions, even though the states were not the one in control of their resources. They stopped performing their functions. They were owing salaries, some owing as many as 9 months' salaries at that point in time, including teachers. So many people were concerned about how we have nosedived in local government administration, and that's exactly what led to the state's intervention, because things were not working. And even then, roads were still being constructed. There's no evidence to suggest that there'll be a change in attitude in the way local governments are administered, even with the Supreme Court ruling. While I understand that there were issues also with the current arrangement, which compelled the federal government to approach the Supreme Court, I understand that in many local governments in the country, about 20 or something, or 23, we didn't have democratically elected.
In a number of states,
yes.
In
a number of states,
yeah.
Democratically elected local government officials, some state governors prefer to use administrators, to run it, or caretaker committee, rather than having election. But that's not the case for some other states in the country, where elections were actually held, to elect people into local government offices. So yes, something happened. That was why the federal government chose to intervene one way or the other. But the fact of the matter is, we should not forget the issue of restructuring the country to true federalism. If we are taking steps to restructure the country, we cannot at the same time, be taking steps, to restructure the country in the sense that by making local government, another tier.
So we have a problem of in our accountability structures then, right?
Yes, we do. We do have a problem with accountability.
My apologies. The issues that you raised with the governors, the state governments taking such drastic actions as they have taken over the years was what gave concerns. Now, there are those who believe that with this position of the Supreme Court, the hope is that more people who are credible, retired this, retired that, would be interested in, since now they are retired, they are at home now, they have a lot more experience, and they will be able to get into the local government administrations and help build the systems in a way that is sustainable, and perhaps even the younger people can be mentored into office. Do you think that's a possible argument? Well,
that's the ideal thing, but in reality, that won't happen. We don't have independent candidacy. Whoever wants to run the local government will still have to go through the political parties, whether you like it or not, because the parties will have to field the candidate. So, therefore, it's up to the party who they choose to field, whether it's a retired person, it's a young man, or it's whatever. Politics does not necessarily work like that. It's a game of numbers. You really need to be able to have the numbers in order to make a change. And of course, the decision of the Supreme Court will now deepen people's involvement in local government affairs. More people call for accountability. The local government needs to be more accountable, now that they are the ones controlling their resources. But the fact of the matter is, how do you become a local government chairman? You still have to go through the political parties. So, and as long as that is the case, parties will only field candidates, that suit them. But eventually, I can see where this is going, because at the end of the day, we may end up with a situation where the constitution needs to be amended, because the clamor for restructuring into true federalism, is so strong that we can't keep ignoring it with all the challenges facing our country.
Okay, well, I understand that Dr. Monday Ashibogu has joined us. He's a public policy analyst, joins us virtually from Yenagoa. Thanks for joining us this morning, Dr. Ashibogu. Now,
morning.
Yeah, you perhaps have listened a little to what Mr. Shomi has been saying, and part of the whole is restructuring. Now, there are those who believe that with this argument of the Supreme Court and a number of other things that have been going on here and there, that the process of restructuring the nation has started. Do you agree?
I do.
Okay.
I agree absolutely that the process has started, but the issues will be how well the implementation will go. We've always had this challenge of stopping midway, having some very funny policy swings each time we have to implement policies that will be in the interest of the public. We've had this scenario that had played out from local government administrations from 1971 to date, and that has also brought to question if the system of governance is a feasible one or sustainable type of governance.
There are those who would be asking you now, Dr. Ashibogu, when you say the process of restructuring has started, how far gone are we? Fiscal restructuring, social restructuring, ethnic restructuring, or political restructuring? Which direction should we be looking for the most prominent, most important ones that can give us the quickest result within the shortest possible time? We're very impatient people.
I think what we should have at the moment should be a cooking broth that will be a combination of ethnic, economic, social, and political. And these combinations are expected that they should run concurrently with each other. The challenge has been that we play precedence of one over the other and sometimes give more of political colorations and ethnic colorations, sometimes with an undertone of religious inclinations to them to run policies. Sadly, yes, those things are part of our narratives as a country, but it's supposed to be attributes that will give us strength in actually achieving nation building. The challenge has been years over that we play precedence of political and ethnic considerations above economic and social considerations that could have been an instrument for cohesion as a country. Restructuring is not something that you wish that it happens within 24 hours, but the process of restructuring starts bit by bit to ensure that beneficiaries are the ultimate citizens who are at the bottom. The local government is closer to people, and we expect that they are supposed to deliver on the dividends of governance to people. Sadly, that has not been the narrative in the past 20 years, and we hope that with some of these court judgments, it will actually whip some persons into line to do the needful for the people.
How significant, in your opinion, is that decision of the Supreme Court? There are those who think, well, it's something that is going to swing well for us. And there are those who also believe that, no, this isn't the way it ought to go. It's an aberration to federalism. What's your own take?
I don't see any aberration here. What I find I have my worries that most times the intentions of the courts or intentions of policymakers have always been to ensure that things are done rightly. But we have people who look at loopholes in policies and laws to take advantage of it and upturn the process. The challenge we've always had is the issue of persons upturning or using the various loopholes in a policy to achieve certain things that is far-fetched from what the objective of that policy is. I'll give you an instance. Mr. Showumi reiterated these issues. Councils at local levels have the responsibility of payment of salaries for primary school teachers and also sanitation and environmental officers. But sadly, that had not been the case for years. That compelled the Nigerian Union of Teachers to be on strike at every 3-month interval. That also led to the emergence of the Universal Basic Education Commission, state universal basic education boards, and at the local government education authorities. And that money was moved from the control of the local governments to the first line charge at federal allocations. And we've not had issues of primary school teachers being owed salaries. That shows also that councils can have the capacity to be irresponsible, just the way governors today have been held responsible for the plight of local councils. So it's just a dilemma between the chicken and the egg, which should come first. You giving this, devolving the power back to councils, it will require some form of responsibility from councils to meet up the obligations of the people at states and local governments. But sadly, you have people who look at the loopholes in these laws and judge and utilize it for their personal gains. That would have been what had happened with the state governors running councils as if it were personal property.
Well, Mr. Showumi, I'm sure you want to react to a thing or two that he said. But one of the issues that is directly connected to this local government financial autonomy, so to speak, is that of the minimum wage. Now, hitherto, what we've had is a situation where the federal government is supposed to put the money in Jack, and the state government should also contribute into that same purse for onward transmission to the states. The belief out there is that that's not what we've had. In fact, the moment the money gets into the Jack purse, the states take advantage of it and do whatever it is that they like with it. Most of them, taken from what you've said. Now the responsibility is of the federal government. This money goes directly from the federal government to the local government administrations. Do you see the states doing the same?
To put in money?
Yes.
Well, again, we need to look at this issue of, I broadly agree with my colleague on the issues in relation to local government, but in relations to restructuring, that's whether we have started the journey, to restructure or not, that's where I probably have some allusions in relation to your question, because before you can enhance the state to subvent or to subvert local government operations, then they must really have the resources. I don't currently believe that the states have the resources.
Even though their allocations have greatly increased over the past few months?
Who owns the resources to start with that has been taken to Abuja? The states. They are the federating units. They own those resources. And then they are all taken to Abuja and then again shared out again to the states and local government. Now, when you actually crunch the figures, the federal government controls 52.68% of the budget, in terms of federal allocation. And then look at the states. You have 36 states, collecting 26%. Crunch the figures and take away the 13%, states collecting 13% derivation. You only have 0.78% allocation to a state. It's zero, less than 1%. Just take a state with 3.5 billion allocation on a monthly basis and divide it by 4 million population. So that's probably what you will get. So the resources are available to the states are not at the same level with the federal government. So therefore, the ability of the states to even support its own operation is highly curtailed, not to talk of subventing local government. When we want to talk about restructuring, we need to begin to look at a situation where that is reversed, so that the federating states are the one, who are paying a certain level of taxes to the federal government to maintain, to manage, administration, federal administration, security, armed forces, and so on and so forth. The issue of monetary policies, customs and immigration, and foreign affairs. That should be the preoccupation of the federal government, because the federal government is just the center controlling, regulating all those affairs. So what we've had over the years is an anomaly. That is why direct allocation of resources, to local government, it's still anti-fiscal federalism, it's anti-restructuring. It's not, that is not the way federalism operates in anywhere in the world or in theory. So therefore, this is something novel, to us in the country. So those, agitating for restructuring will continue to, raise issues around this. So even for the states government, they do not have the capacity. Currently, they are busy looking at how to pay the 70,000 minimum wage.
But they themselves are already, having conversations with the federal government on this issue that you raised. I think it was Governor Pintiri that raised the alarm, and the number of state governors, I believe, are already talking with him. Now, look, there are some resources that belong to us in states that the federal government is controlling, and consequently, the federal government, if the federal government is doing what it's doing now, giving some authority to the local government administrations, then we need to have conversations about these resources. I think that's that conversation is already going on as well.
Absolutely.
Okay, I understand that Mr. Dania has also joined us this morning. Mr. Tony Dania is a legal practitioner. Thanks for joining us this morning, Mr. Dania. So we are talking about the state of the nation. One of the strongest issues that's happened within the past 2 weeks is the local government autonomy. And just in the course of this week, the federal government, the president sat with Labour, and they agreed to a 70,000 naira minimum wage. And that's, should I call it comical? Can you hear me, Mr. Dania? Okay, we'll come back to that later on. So, well, Dr. Ashibogo, I'm sure you listened to all of what Mr. Showumi said, particularly about whether or not restructuring has started, given the conversation between the federal government and the states, or rather the states, concerning the resources that should be coming to the states that are not. What's your take?
We had a way of reversing things in this country. Tragically, this was the experience from the central government system after the 1966 coup, and we had actually imbibed the central system as a component of federalism. Tragically, that's not how federalism ought to work. And the question has always been the phobia by those who are at the center to lose control, because funding will now go to those at the bottom to actually administer their communities and environments. And that also brings to the question if we have what is called the sustainable federalism. You have different organizations, different levels of governance that are not sustainable. Some states have local governments that cannot even generate IGR to pay basic needs, not to talk of salaries. And then we keep creating more and more agencies of government at states, at local government, and at the national level. So the control of funds is not just only the issue. Is the institutional framework we have established over the years, and how do we cope with the idea of having to restructure without having consequences that may be more negative than positive to the people of the country? If you are to look at the Orosoye's report also, it called for a cost-effective government. But the question is, where are you going to throw in these persons who are going to get out of the public and civil service? The private sector, as we speak, lacks capacity to absorb that number. And you are quite aware that the economic system is already challenged as it is. And everybody, we're just hanging on the line. And if you have to do restructuring, it comes with consequences. The question is, are we ready to face the consequence? A lot of us clamored for the removal of fuel subsidy. And then the president came and said it's off. Now we are seeing the impact of that same removal of subsidy. We're seeing the removal of Align the Naira to find its value. Now, these are policies ordinarily people have been beneficiaries of because of the loopholes we find in those policies for subsidy, for the forex market. The same would also apply for restructuring. It requires a very sincere implementation and also looking at the impact and the consequences that will come thereof.
Perhaps the issue here, my apologies, Dr. Ashibogo, perhaps the issue is we don't even think through these things that we want, right? We want local governments to be autonomy. Just a second.
Issues.
Just 1 second, Dr. Ashibogo. Now, we know that the right thing is what the Constitution says. Money doesn't sit in the purse. Money goes straight to the local government administrations, and from the federal government and the states straight to the local government administrations. But given what Mr. Showumi said now, as concerning why the states decided to subjugate, sort of, the local governments, now the Supreme Court has ruled. Where do we go from here? What's the assurance, as Mr. Showumi has asked, that that decision of the federal government, of the Supreme Court, by the way, has been thought through, and that the consequences, when it begins to bite us, we are ready for it?
But I think the thing is, there are two levels of funding for councils as provided by our Constitution. The first line charge that was supposed to come from the federal government to councils, and the reason why it had to go through the state governments was the state governments were also supposed to also match that fund and send to councils. That had not been the case. The states will withhold the same funds, and at their beck and call, at their whims and caprices of the leader, whatever comes to the council is just okay. And councils suffer dearly for it. Now, if you're telling governments at the federal level to send this money directly to councils, I have no problem with that. Some of them will receive zero funding from their state governments as a protest. The thing is, I keep saying we need to be very sincere in our applications. we need to ask ourselves, it's not just about Supreme Court ruling. There are a lot of things we do in this country that requires no legal backing. Common sense is actually the first governing principle to any form of governance in the world. And the truth be said, what is the guarantee the councils will be responsible enough to apply these funds rather than some other persons lining their pockets? It may just be a change of name, all former documents remain valid.
No, so let's just a second, Dr. Ashibogu, we're coasting home. A legal practitioner has joined us. Let's hope we can hear him now. Mr. Dania, can you hear me? Well, I guess we'll have to bring in Mr. Dania physically to the studio sometime next week. Now, you've also listened to him, Mr. Showmi. You've listened to everything that Dr. Ashibogu has said. It will seem like my concern really is everything that's happening in Nigeria, all over the federal government, for the Federal Republic of Nigeria, starts at the local level. The argument of the president before the ruling of the Supreme Court, I think, okay, well, the case was in court already at the time, where the president was talking to some leaders and said that you should call out their governors and get them to be responsible to the local authorities. Now, I don't know what you think the local authorities themselves can do. I'm not talking about the politicians, the local government chairman and all of that. I'm talking about the community development associations. I'm talking about traditional rulers and all of those people who are leaders in the communities. Do you think there is anything they can do to ensure accountability?
Yes, a lot can be done to ensure accountability. But even within that, you cannot still ignore the states. If they're going to have to contribute money as envisaged in that constitution to local government administration. So therefore, we cannot just push them aside.
I agree with you, yes. But don't the state houses of assembly have some kind of oversight responsibility?
They do.
Exactly.
Yes, absolutely.
So that's the state, isn't it?
That is the state,
But
yes.
the problem a number of people, I think, are pointing at is the governors being lords over the local governments.
Well, I will still repeat it, it's not in all the states.
No, I know. Yeah. That is it.
Yes.
That is the thing. But it is a reality now.
Well, that happened in many places. When you look at the issue of traditional rulers, which you brought in, how will they be able to moderate the affairs of a local government when they have no constitutional rule other than the state's houses of assembly? In fact, under the present chieftaincy laws in many states, a local government chairman can dethrone a traditional ruler. So that's, you begin to see the weakness of the system. Same also, the CDA is not able to regulate, the activities at local government level other than input in terms of advice. If things are going wrong, there's nothing they can do. So basically, it still boils down to the states, through the states' houses of assembly that will carry out the oversight functions and regulate the affairs of the local government. That is still the position till today. The Supreme Court has not, abrogated that.
Okay, now to the issues of fiscal responsibility that Dr. Ashibogu raised. The federal government does have its jobs cut out for it, but the states do have their own jobs cut out for them. A good number of activities, economic development, if they will happen in the states. Do you see them? Do you see the states, pulling their weight in that regard?
Well, I honestly think the states will do that because the problem many states are facing currently is the lopsided federalism which we are practicing. Even states that are considered, to be non-performing, because there is no way you get less than 1% of your own resources taken to the center, and the center is controlling 52.68%, and you're expected to perform some magic.
While I get that argument,
yes.
Mr. Showmi, several reports have pointed at the fiscal irresponsibility of the state governments with the resources that they have.
You know what the problem we have, which people are not talking about, is what I would term as state indolence. We have a constitution, we have a construction in Nigeria that allows, room for state indolence. What do I mean by state indolence? For instance, if you produce, under the previous, before the Tinubu's administration, if you produce electricity, invest in electricity like Lagos State did, Akwa Ibom or Rivers or something, you'll have to pump it through the national grid to be shared by everybody. So why should I, as a state, maybe in another part of the country, invest in electricity? That is state indolence. It's actually the constitution which we are practicing, is actually the confused federalism which we are practicing that allows for that. And the good thing is Mr. President has taken a step to say, look, hang on a minute, if you want to produce electricity, you can produce it. But the issue still remains the issue of distribution. The transmission lines are old and all that, so it still requires a lot of investment.
Well,
so it's still the nature of the federalism we are practicing, a kind of centralized federalism, which is creating this problem.
There might be a little bit of argument there, because even I think it's in Abia State now that they have, electricity working for them. I don't know how it's running. So if they are not having problems, I'm not going to complain, am I? But let me ask Dr. Ashibagu, do you agree with what Mr. Shoumi has said right now?
Absolutely, I do, but I beg to differ about this application by state governments. We've always had I think some of the state governments have more powers than even the federal government from the way they appear. They tend to walk like emperors. That's the truth. If you find some of them have the houses of assembly in their pockets and dictates the kind of laws that should be passed in the administration of councils. And tragically, that has been what has impacted over 70% of the councils nationwide. And we are quite aware that everybody is just thinking about how to line their pockets. That's the truth. The truth is, the money going to councils now, you're going to create billionaires at council levels. You are not going to have this thing impact on the lives of the Nigerian at council levels. We are concerned about the responsibility of councils and states to make sure these councils work. If a council works, people will actually be beneficiaries of that system. Everybody looks at the federal government as being responsible for everything.
Okay.
And sadly so, the federal government takes it as a responsibility for taking over 52% of revenues, and yet we're still having this argument over and over again. It will be only appropriate for a system to create rules that will govern, that will make everyone accountable.
Okay.
The Supreme Court judgment only states what the federal government should do and keep up to that responsibility to councils. But the issue now is, will councils be responsible enough to implement this with the funds they've received?
I think that's a question to answer over time. One of the things, unfortunately, we are out of time now, but one of the things that we've had over time, because, I've been part of certain, conversations with some civil society organizations invited to public fora that are asking the question of accountability structures within the space. At the end of the day, it's about the people. Now, the people, Mr. Shoumi has spoken about state indolence. I hope the citizens themselves are not indolent, and I hope by now we'll begin to take what needs to come to us as seriously as it ought to be. Thank you so much for your time this morning, Dr. Monday Ashibagu, public policy analyst, and as well as Mr. Shoumi, who is a social commentator. Thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Definitely we'll have you gentlemen again some other time. Now, something more concerning is about food security. And guess what? It's not just about that. We're talking about Nigeria being a productive nation. How do we do that? By being able to export. And that's part of the concerns in this next conversation. Stay with us.